My name is Anna Miles Permakoff. I'm a staff attorney with the Family Permanency Project at the Children's Law Center. And I'm here today to talk to you about obtaining a subsidy for your client who's adopting or obtaining guardianship of a child in foster care. The subsidy can be a very important part of the case. It usually comes as you're preparing for trial or directly after before the guardianship or adoption finalizes. It's important to pay attention to this part of the process, as obtaining a subsidy often makes a big difference to the type of care that your client is going to be able to provide the child that they're adopting or obtaining guardianship of out of foster care. Sometimes your client will be an elderly relative who has stopped working, in which case their income may have shrunk. This child may be a child that they were never planning on caring for. They may not have saved for this child. They may have already raised many of their own children, and we're not planning on having this child come into their home. So the subsidy may make the difference for them about whether they're able to care for the child or not. Keep in mind, too, that the child that your client is adopting out of foster care or obtaining guardianship of out of foster care may be a child with extremely high needs. These could be medical needs, special education needs, or mental health needs that will cost a great deal of money to properly attend to. Therefore, it's important that you pay attention to the amount of the subsidy being offered and discuss with your client whether that's going to be enough to allow them to provide high quality care for the child. The Guardianship and Adoption Subsidy is an agreement between the Child and Family Services Agency and the adoptive parent or guardian that you represent. It lasts until age 21. This was a change that was made in May of 2010. It used to be that a guardianship or adoption subsidy only lasted until the age of 18. However, the law was changed to reflect the needs of DC's youth in foster care. Agreements can be terminated or modified before the child turns 21, although both are unlikely. To be eligible for an adoption subsidy, a child must be determined to be special needs based on several possible conditions. An exhaustive list of these conditions can be found in the Child and Family Services Agency Adoption Subsidy Policy, published in May 2011. A special needs child may receive an adoption subsidy until the age of 21. The adoption subsidy agreement must be signed prior to the entry of the final decree of adoption. Sometimes the adoption subsidy agreement will be sent directly to your client, so it's important to warn them that if they receive anything from CFSA titled Adoption Subsidy Agreement, to share it with you before signing it. It's important for you to look over this paperwork very carefully to make sure that the child's needs have been correctly described and accounted for, and that your client will be able to provide the same level of care to the child once the adoption has finalized with this level of subsidy. The guardianship subsidy is very similar to the adoption subsidy. Again, to qualify, the child must be adjudicated neglected and be determined to have some kind of special need. The eligibility criteria are found in the D section of the DC Code on guardianship and are similar to those for adoption. Again, the guardianship subsidy agreement must be entered into prior to the issuance of a final order for guardianship. And again, you should warn your client that the agreement may come directly to them instead of to you, and that you would like to review it with them carefully before they sign it. Similarly to the adoption subsidy, the guardianship subsidy will extend until the child turns 21. This reflects one of two changes in the law in 2010. The first being that it can extend until 21, and the second being that people other than kinship caregivers are now allowed to file for guardianship and to receive a guardianship subsidy. Some of the things that you will want to go over with your client when helping them to decide what level of subsidy they need and what level of subsidy you should be negotiating for with Child and Family Services is to find out what kind of services the child is receiving that may terminate with the issuance of a final order, either in an adoption or guardianship case. These are services such as tutoring, mental health services, different types of counseling, or even where the child is going to school. For example, if they've been placed in a private placement by DC Public Schools, and when the adoption finalizes, the child will become a resident of Maryland and no longer eligible for DC Public Schools to be paying their tuition at a private placement. This is something you will need to work out with your client and develop a plan for prior to the adoption or guardianship finalizing. You'll also want to talk to your client about what kind of foster care board rate they're receiving at the moment, and make sure that the adoption subsidy or the guardianship subsidy is equal to or higher than that amount in order to ensure that they're able to continue providing the child with the same level of care. In terms of the question of how much can be negotiated, that will depend on the case and specifically the needs of the child. While there is some flexibility in how much CFSA will be willing to negotiate and how much leeway you'll have to negotiate a higher level of subsidy for your client, you will need to make a compelling case that the level of subsidy needs to be higher in order to care for that individual child's needs. In doing so, you'll want to draw out details about the type of services that this child requires and any kind of medical, physical, or emotional disabilities that they may have that may require a higher level of subsidy. CFSA may tell you that none of these things are negotiable. It's important to remember there's no harm in trying and that this is a moment for you to be an advocate for your client and help them get the support that they need to care for this child that they are adopting or getting guardianship of out of foster care. Our casework here at Children's Law Center has given me the opportunity to see firsthand many times the difference that a subsidy can make in the capacity of a caregiver opening their home to a child to provide them with high quality care. Thank you for your attention to these issues during your casework and for your help to our clients negotiating and navigating the adoption and guardianship subsidy process.